Bonjour. Good morning, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be in France. Let me start with an anecdote. I think it may be instructive to the conversation here in France this weekend. When Angela Merkel became Chancellor of Germany, she asked me to come to Berlin in the first few weeks of her new government to help her address the question, how do we grow the German economy in the 21st century? When I got to Berlin, the first question I asked the Chancellor, Madam Chancellor, how do you grow the German economy, the European Union economy, the global economy, in the last stages of a great energy era? This is the issue facing the whole world. I was just with the Chinese leadership for 2 weeks. I just got back from Beijing last night. And we see the same problems in China as in Europe, as in America, and that is the second industrial revolution of the 20th century. It's sunsetting. It's clear. Fossil fuel energies, nuclear power, these are old energies. They're getting more expensive. Their prices are volatile on continental and world markets. The technologies based on these energies, like the internal combustion engine, centralized electrification, are moribund. These are old, tired technologies with almost no S-curve left. The productivity has been taken. And now we find ourselves, as the second industrial revolution slides into its senescent stage, the world is experiencing more unemployment, less productivity, less opportunities, and we have a younger generation asking if their future will be as bright as their parents. This global economic crisis is now compounded with an even more important crisis, a species crisis. We've been spewing CO2 into the atmosphere for 2 centuries. The first industrial revolution in the 19th century, second industrial revolution in the 20th century, and we now have so much CO2 up in that atmosphere that we are in real-time climate change. And it's dramatically infecting our agricultural systems, our infrastructure, and imperiling the ability of our species to continue to live on this little planet in the universe. So what do? We need a new economic vision for the world, and it has to be compelling. We need an economic game plan for that vision, and it actually has to be deliverable. It has to move as quickly in the emerging nations as in the highly industrialized countries. And what I'm here to say to you this morning, we have to be off carbon, not clean, not low, clean tech, not low carbon. We're going to have to be off all carbon-based energies within the next 30 years. We're going to have substitutes for fertilizers and pesticides and pharmaceutical products and construction materials and synthetic fiber and power and transport and heat and light. We have to be off carbon fuels in 30 years if we have any hope of reversing the adverse effects of climate change, which are now putting our species in doubt, not to mention our fellow creatures. So we have to step back, ask the question, how do the great economic revolutions in history occur? If we know how they occur, we can get a roadmap here in France and all over the world as to what we need to do to move to the next stage of the human journey. When we look at the sweep of history, what's quite interesting is that there's a pattern. New economic paradigms emerge when new energy regimes arise. New energy regimes make possible more complex civilizations, but then they require something else. The advent of new communication revolutions that are agile enough to manage the new energy regimes, all through history. When communication revolutions merge, converge, and manage energy revolutions, it changes the way we organize society, our relationship with each other and nature. It changes our temporal spatial orientation. It changes consciousness. Let me give you an example from recent times. 19th century. We had a very powerful convergence of communication and energy in the early 19th century, a first industrial revolution. We went from manual print presses to steam power printing. This was a big deal, like the internet today, because all of a sudden we could mass produce huge amounts of printed material with low transaction costs. Well, then we needed to create literacy to absorb this new communication revolution, so we established public schools, and the French school system was the archetype of public schools around the world. We created a print-literate workforce with the communication skills to manage a very complex, coal-powered, rail-run, steam-driven industrial revolution. Could not have done that with an illiterate workforce. 20th century. We had a second convergence of communication energy, a second industrial revolution, centralized electricity, especially the telephone. Later, radio and television became the powerful communication media to manage a more dispersed automobile era, an oil culture, a suburban build-out infrastructure, a mass consumer society. That second industrial revolution is clearly on life support. I chair a group of 120 global companies, electronics, IT, logistics, transport, construction. Everyone knows this in the boardroom. It isn't talked about publicly. The second industrial revolution is dying. We are, however, right now on the cusp of a new convergence of communication and energy, a third industrial revolution. It's emerging here in Europe and very quickly now in China. I just don't know if we'll get there in time. We had a very powerful communication revolution in the last 25 years, the personal computer and the internet. Now, what's so interesting about these communication revolutions is the way they're organized. Now, I'm sure I'm the oldest person here. I grew up on centralized communication, top-down, one-to-many, newspapers, book publishing, magazines, radio, television. This internet revolution, it's a damned interesting revolution because it's organized completely different. The internet is organized to be distributed, not centralized. It's collaborative, it's not top-down. It's peer-to-peer, it's not vertically integrated. It's lateral power. And this is the key that we need to understand the paradigm shift emerging. Here we are in 2013. The World Wide Web came on in 1990. 23 years later, a third of the human race, equipped with cheap cell phones they give away and even cheaper computers, desktop computers, and a third of the human race is sending audio, video, and text to each other at the speed of light, peer-to-peer, distributed and collaborative, and this is key, at near zero marginal cost. That is amazing. At near zero marginal cost. But that's only half the story. This powerful communication revolution, which is distributed, collaborative, peer-to-peer, laterally scaled, is now beginning to merge with a new energy regime. Distributed energies, which actually have to be organized collaboratively and scale laterally. It's a perfect match. What are distributed energies? Well, let me compare them to elite energies. Coal, oil, shale gas, uranium for nuclear power. They're elite. They're not in your backyard when you go home. They're only found in a few places. They require huge military investments, huge geopolitical management, and massive capital to organize these very elite energies from the wellhead to the end user. And the energies are sunsetting. We hit global peak oil production, according to the International Energy Agency, in 2006. What are distributed energies? Go home after this conference. You and I have all the energy we'll ever need in our backyard for the end of time. The sun shines all over this beautiful planet every day. 45 minutes of sunlight can power the entire world many times over for a whole year. The wind blows across the earth 24 hours a day. 20% of that wind harness gives us 7 times more power than the global economy will ever need. In the rural areas, we have massive biomass, agricultural and forestry waste. Much of it can be recycled back to energy for our needs. In the coastal regions, the ocean tides are coming in every day. It's a source of energy. Underneath the ground, right here where we are in this building and all over the world, is a hot geothermal core. It's the remnants of the sun. Everything here is from the sun. When we say, can we do this, we're part of the sun. And that geothermal heat's still there to remind us that's energy. We have enough of this distributed energy in every square inch of the planet to provide for our little species till kingdom comes. The European Union has made a formal commitment to a 5-pillar third industrial revolution infrastructure that can change the paradigm for the economy. And I was privileged to develop this plan with the European Union over the last 11 years. This is our formal plan. This plan was endorsed by the European Parliament in June of 2007. It's working its way through the European Commission and the member states, and let me say, Germany and Denmark are so far ahead on these 5 pillars, everyone's got catch-up to do. I'm going to make a speculation in a few minutes to tell you I believe France is going to be the next player in, a huge opening here in the next 24 months to join Germany side by side in this revolution. I saw that President Francois Hollande, just as an aside, a week ago introduced his new economic plan for France, €5 billion commitment, 32 industries, so that they can all move into the 21st century. And he said, we will not be left out of the third industrial revolution. That's his quote. Yes, but here's what I would like to say to President Hollande. I'll be meeting with the Prime Minister tomorrow morning in Paris. It's important to vest these industries, but unless they're part of this new infrastructure and plug and play into it, it's a waste. If we put all this investment in all these industries and you're still in a 20th century second industrial revolution infrastructure with centralized fossil fuels and nuclear power, centralized telecommunications, old technologies, you will not have what you need for a platform for the new industry. So yes, I applaud Francois Hollande. I'm glad he said France will not be left out of the third industrial revolution, but those industries that are being vetted with assistance have to plug and play into this 5 pillars that I'm going to explain now, or it's a total waste of money. Pillar 1, the EU is committed to 20% renewable energy by 2020. That's a mandate, not a suggestion. Every region in Europe has to get there. That means 1/3 of the electricity has to be green. Pillar 2, how do we collect energy that's literally everywhere? We collect it everywhere. So think buildings, buildings, buildings. There's 191 million buildings in the European Union, homes, offices, factories, and barns and sheds. Our goal is to convert every single existing building in Europe, retrofit it, get it more efficient, because until we retrofit it, we can't do the power. Efficient, retrofit, and we're going to put power plants on every building in Europe. So you can collect solar off the roof, wind off the side of your building, get the geothermal heat from underneath your building, convert your garbage and bioconverters to energy in your kitchen, etc. The new buildings, Positive Power, and the great French construction company Bouygues has built the first positive power building in the world. This is the key invention, just like Daimler-Benz internal combustion engine in the second industrial revolution. This building's in the Paris suburbs. It sucks up so much green energy from the sun, it provides all of its needs and sends surplus back to the grid. And within 24 months of Bouygues doing this, 25 universities have done it. And now contractors are doing it all over the world with prefab material at costs that are equal to traditional construction costs. Once you know how to do it, it's so easy to do. Pillar 2 jumpstarts the French and European economy. Millions of jobs, thousands of SMEs, 30-year build-out, completely changed the infrastructure of Europe. Let me use an analogy here. In 1970, we had a few centralized mainframe computers. They cost millions of dollars. And then Steve Jobs and a bunch of kids came along. They invented the personal computer. Today, everyone in this room has a cheap cell phone. You're sending your information, you're gossiping, you're on Google, you're on all of these media sites, and you're doing it at near zero marginal cost. Today, similarly, we have a few power and utility companies around the world that generate fossil fuel and nuclear power. We buy it. But already in Europe, and especially Germany and Denmark, we have millions of small players now producing their own green electricity. Their buildings are now micro power plants. Let me be clear. Germany, since the chancellor's come in, is now 25% green electricity. They're heading to 35% by 2020. They've converted 1 million buildings. There's 1 million buildings in Germany producing some green electricity, and they've created hundreds of thousands of jobs. They've created almost as many jobs just at this point as the new jobs that are being looked at here with the new plan by Francois Hollande, and that's only pillar 2. And what we know is the technologies are scaling in, and the technologies for getting renewable energies are going to be as cheap as your cell phone in 15 years. Why do we know this? The economists in my global group have run the numbers. Solar and wind have been on an exponential curve for 20 years, similar to the exponential curve in computer chips. Absolutely, 20 years on this curve. If we stay on this curve, just like computers went from $1 million to almost zero, the harvesting technologies for renewables are going on the same curve, and you will be able to harvest solar, wind, geothermal, biomass for about the same price as a cell phone in 20 years from now. And here's what's important to understand. The sun off your roof is free. The wind off the side of your building is free. The geothermal heat under your building, that's free. Your garbage converted energy, that's free. So just as we laid out the infrastructure for the internet, and now it's near zero marginal cost to produce information, and 2 billion people are doing it. As we scale in the new harvesting technologies for renewables across France and Europe, and every building's a power plant, just like you have a computer, the actual cost of harvesting the energy is near zero marginal cost. It already is. If you put a solar panel on your roof right now, you have to pay back the investment, 7 to 10 years. But the actual energy is nearly free the moment that panel's up, or the wind turbine, or your heat pump. Fossil fuels and nuclear power will never compete with near zero marginal cost energy. This turns energy from scarcity to abundance because these energies are everywhere, everywhere. We just have to grab them, and they don't pollute the planet. That's pillar 2. Pillar 3, storage. Sun isn't always shining. Sometimes the wind blowing at night. We want the electricity during the day. It's not cooperating. Water tables can be down for hydroelectricity because of drought, climate change. These are intermittent energies. We have to store them. So at the EU level, we're in favor of all storage technologies: batteries, flywheels, capacitors, water pumping, air compression. We like them all. But we focused at the center of storage on hydrogen as our key storage. It's the basic element of the universe. It stores green electricity like you store media and digital. And it's modular. You can use it in your apartment or across the ERDF transmission grid. We've invested 8 billion euros in Europe in public-private deployment of hydrogen storage. Pillar 3. Pillar 4, this is where the internet revolution combines with the distributed energies to create a nervous system, a neural system for the new platform. We're using off-the-shelf internet technology, and we're transforming the electricity and power grid of Europe to an energy internet, a distributed grid that's smart. So when millions of buildings across France and Europe are producing just small amounts of green electricity, you're going to store it in hydrogen like we store media and digital. You don't need some of that green electricity during the month. You can program your app to sell that electricity with your software across an energy internet from the Irish Sea all the way to the borders of Eastern Europe and beyond. Just like creating information, stored in digital, shared online. E.ON is testing the hydrogen storage with Hydrogenics in our group across Germany now in their complex. Pillar 4, Deutsche Telekom is successfully testing out the whole distributed grid across Germany for the last few years. And it's now operational in some parts of Europe. Pillar 5, transport and logistics. Electric vehicles are here. Fuel cell vehicles in 3 years, 6 major auto companies in mass production. Fuel cells based on hydrogen, cars, buses, and trucks. You'll be able to plug in your vehicle anywhere there's infrastructure, get green electricity, and wherever you travel in France, there'll be a plug into the grid, every parking space, connect in, get green electricity, or when your car's there and you're in your house, the computer's going, it's monitoring the price of electricity on the grid, and if the price goes up, your computer can be programmed with your app to sell your electricity from your car back to the grid. These 5 pillars alone are meaningless components It's only when we connect them that we create the synergies for a new general purpose technology platform, a third industrial revolution. Don't make the mistake, President Hollande, that President Obama made. I voted for the president. I like the president. He wanted a green economy. He spent billions of dollars, no green economy. Because he siloed the investments in standalone projects, a battery factory in one state, an electric car factory in another state, unconnected. This, President Hollande, is an infrastructure revolution. All the investments in these industries have to plug and play into the infrastructure to get the advantage of the productivity and growth. For example, in the EU, we've been very successful in Pillar 1. We have a lot of renewable energy. Millions of people producing renewable energy. We haven't moved Pillar 4 quick enough, the energy internet. So we've got this 60-year-old power grid that's centralized, servo-mechanical, has never been able to manage millions of players at one time, and it can't do it. It's not managing peak and base loads. Pillar 1 has been so successful, we have so much renewable energy moving. Some regions are 40% green electricity. But we're losing 3 out of 4 kilowatts because we didn't put Pillar 3 in quick enough storage. No storage, we lose the energy. And now our car companies, I know Nissan, Renault, who joined us in our master plan for Nord-Pas-de-Calais, and Daimler, they're petrified. Because they're putting out billions of dollars for these vehicles, and if they have no place to plug and play for an infrastructure, it's all lost. This is an infrastructure revolution, the second industrial revolution. You had to have the internal combustion engine. But you also had to have the oil and pipe gas lines. You also had to have centralized electricity so Henry Ford could have mobile electric power tools to bring the work to the workers to put a cheap car out. But you also had to have the road systems put in so you could have suburban build-out. But you also had to have telephones moving to rural areas for communication to build out the new suburbs. You had to do it all. It's a systemic change. It's power to the people. I mean that literally and figuratively. Envision how the democratization of information has changed the world, the sociology of this world. Now, envision in 20 years from now, several billion people are going to be producing their own green electricity, just like they're producing their own information, actually, with the IT apps. That changes the politics of this planet, from geopolitics to biosphere consciousness. Everyone is a prosumer. That's now happening in enough countries that we know it can scale, and especially Germany. If Germany can do it, it's not academic. The music companies, they did not understand file sharing of music. Millions of young people started creating software after school, sharing files of music free, zero marginal cost. The music companies went out of business in 5 years. I'm in publishing. The publishing industry for books, the newspapers, we didn't see the blogosphere coming. Millions of people, near zero marginal cost, sharing information. Now, the publishing industries are suffering. Newspapers are going out of business. We're trying to create new value in an internet world. But when we start creating our own energy and sharing it across continental grids, that's the second half of this story. Whether any company succeeds or fails in any industry in the world in the next 20 years will have not much to do with your labor cost. Labor costs are becoming a smaller part of the mix. It's going to have everything to do with your energy cost during this volatile transition. And energy is not just fuel and electricity. Everything is energy. Now, I want to share with you a dirty little secret in economics. I don't know, is Joe still here? Joe Stiglitz, you around? My old buddy? Not here? All right. There's a little secret in economics that economists actually, it's like throwing water on the wicked witch. They don't want to talk about this. And that is, what is the nature of productivity and growth? We used to believe it's 2 factors. Machine capital, put in more machines, and improve the worker performance. But when Robert Solow won the Nobel Prize for economic growth theory in the 1980s, he let the little secret out. He said, we got a problem here. When we look at productivity and growth throughout the Industrial Revolution, new machine capital and improved worker performance accounts for only about 14% of the productivity and growth. Robert Solow said, where did the other 86% come from? They don't know. It's called the Solow residual. Dr. Abramowitz, some of you economists know him, former head of the American Economic Association, formed the Stanford Economics Department. He said, this is a measure of our ignorance. Why am I bringing this up? We now know where the other 86% of the productivity and growth comes. New studies have been done. In fact, here at INSEAD, Robert Ayers, economics emeritus, great professor. He's one of many economists and physicists and engineers who have done studies over the last 20 years. When you put one more factor in, and that is the thermodynamic efficiency of useful work, and combine it with machines and worker performance, it accounts for the other 86% of productivity. Why didn't we know this? This is esoteric, and I know there are people here with MBAs and PhDs here. We didn't know it because when economics was penned as a profession in the 1700s, the big deal was Newton's physics. So all the early economists wanted to use Newton's metaphors. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Adam Smith borrowed that for his invisible hand of supply and demand. Baptists say a body in motion stays in motion. Baptists says supply generates demand, which generates supply, which generates demand unless obstructed by an outside force. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with using Newton's metaphors, but it has nothing to do with economics. And that's what I'm here to tell every economist in this room. And that's why we don't understand the world we've created and the world we're destroying. Economics is not based on Newton's physics. It's based on the laws of thermodynamics. The first and second law of thermodynamics. The first law, the energy of the universe is constant. We've never created or destroyed it. The second law, we can transform it, but only in one direction, from usable to used up, from concentrated to dispersed, from available to unavailable. You burn a piece of coal, all that energy is still there, but now all of those gases are not available to get the useful work from you. Even with recycling, there's a loss. It's called entropy. So economics is based on thermodynamics. We take low entropy available energy. It can be a rare earth. It can be a fossil fuel. And we take these available low entropy resources and we start converting them. At every conversion, there's an energy gain, but at the expense of an entropy loss. Then eventually, all the goods and services go back to nature and they're less available. GDP is not a measure of our wealth. It's a measure of our debt to nature. So we now know that the other 86% of productivity and growth is the thermodynamic efficiency of useful work, and Henry Ford could have told you this. Every chemist, every engineer, every biologist, every architect in this room could have told you this because you all studied the laws of thermodynamics. It's not required in a single business school in the world. There are two different languages about how this world works. Henry Ford understood. They said, well, how did you get all the productivity? I had electric mobile power tools from electricity. It allowed the work to come to the workers, and we can increase our productivity. It's thermodynamics. So, what does this have to do with the third industrial revolution? Here's the nub of what I want to get to, and what I'll talk to the Prime Minister about, and hopefully with President Hollande again. We haven't chatted for a while. This third industrial revolution infrastructure is a smart, intelligent nervous system. It's the first intelligent infrastructure in all of history. The others have been dumb. This one thinks. It's a distributed mind. As you phase in these 5 pillars in every community and region of France, these 5 pillars connect everything to everything. The Internet of everything. The Internet of things. So we connect, and the software and sensors of these 5 pillars are continually feeding back big data on your resources and how they're moving in the system, on the value chain. What's going on in every factory and office, moment to moment, in your production and distribution of goods and services. How many people bought how many products in the store in real time in the last hour? What's going on with the price of electricity 60 minutes ago on the grid, and what will it be in 60 minutes from now? And what are the weather conditions that will determine how much air conditioning we're using in 2 hours? And what's happening to the circular economy with the recycling process in the landfills? All of that big data, open source for everyone to have, allows every business, every homeowner, every citizen, every government to use that big data feedback moment to moment to create advanced analytics. The advanced analytics allows us to create predictive algorithms. The predictive algorithms allow us to then program our little apps, small business, big business, whatever, so that we can increase our thermodynamic efficiencies, radically reduce our energy use across the whole value chain, and dramatically increase productivity. That's the platform. Whether it's here in France, you want to be in the third industrial revolution, your president. I just got back from China last night. I met with the vice premier, Wang Yang, who's in charge of the industry. I met with the science and technology minister. We met with all the leaders. They're all moving on how to do this third industrial revolution. It's not just Germany anymore, but soon France. The second industrial revolution started at 3% efficiency in 1905 in the US. We leveled off at 14% efficiency thermodynamics in 1980. Japan actually leveled off at 24%. They did better. But that's it. That's why the economy's not moving with those energies, those technologies, and that infrastructure. That's it. Can't get any more out of it. The third industrial revolution can take us from 14% efficiency to 40% and maybe even 60% before thermodynamics engineer stops us. Dramatic. But the new productivity is based on less energy, off fossil fuels, renewable energies, that allows us very quickly to increase productivity, eliminate the CO2 content and methane and nitrous oxide, and hopefully replenish the planet in time. If there's an alternative to these 5 pillars, I have no idea what they would be. It's just common sense. The alternative would be to stay in the 20th century. Fossil fuels, nuclear power, centralized energy, centralized telecommunications, vertically integrated companies that actually can't scale this. This revolution favors small and medium-sized enterprises, and France is a powerhouse in small and medium-sized enterprises, who can come together peer-to-peer in lateral networks and scale more effectively. The business model here for manufacturing, 3D printing. Advanced manufacturing, it's not quite understood in the US, it is in Germany. Unfortunately, in the US, everyone's excited about 3D printing, but they're trying to then graft that manufacturing model onto a centralized 20th century platform based on shale gas, tar sands, and centralized communication. We'll get nothing out of it. Germany understands you have to plug and play 3D printing into a distributed third industrial revolution infrastructure. Let me explain. You're in Le Havre, Port City. You have a 3D printer in your local small and medium-sized company. Open source software. And the software is instructing molten material to layer by layer build up a physical product with moving parts. By the way, the feedstock, it's moving to near zero marginal cost. We're now using sand, gravel, rocks, recycled plastic, metal, and even paper now. It's not there yet, but it's moving there. What's interesting about this 3D printer in Le Havre is they can outcompete centralized factories day one because the production process is additive. They're building up the product layer by layer as a whole piece. Subtractive manufacturing is what I taught. I taught the advanced management program in Wharton for 15 years, and I taught my CEOs, you get a big hunk of material from nature, cut it up, throw some of it out, then what's left, you build a product. A 3D printer here in Le Havre can take the materials and build it up with 1/10 of the material use. No centralized factory can compete with that. And then if you're here and you have a third industrial revolution infrastructure in the region, you can plug and play your 3D printer and you can get your local green electricity to power your factory at near zero marginal cost because it's all produced right here. Then you can market your products across the world on websites like Etsy at near zero marginal cost. And then you can transport your products from Le Havre across France and Europe in your own green vehicles produced with electricity at near zero marginal cost. This is the democratization of manufacturing. It's actually info-facturing. But you have to have the infrastructure to plug and play. This is not academic either. We're just finished, some of you know that our TRR consulting group, we just finished a year-long Third Industrial Revolution master plan for Nord-Pas-de-Calais, which is the oldest industrial region in Europe. President Pécheron, the president of the region, and President Vasseur of the Chamber of Commerce, hundreds of business leaders, academicians, researchers, and scientists from the region joined hundreds of our people from around the world in a year-long effort. And our French companies were at the table. ERDF, Michel Ballon joined us for the distributed grid. Bouygues joined us for construction. Nissan Renault joined us on transport. Alstom joined us on transport and power. Schneider joined us on the efficiency applications with Rexall, and I could go on. These companies aren't leaving the second industrial revolution tomorrow morning, but they understand that the smart companies have to be in two models at once. As the second industrial revolution sunsets over the next 40 years, the third industrial revolution is sunrising. The smart companies will be both in the old fuels and the new energies. They'll be in the old business model that's centralized and the new business model that's distributed. They'll be in the old technologies that vertically scale and the new technologies that laterally scale. And within 40 years, the second industrial revolution will be over. The third will be here. This happened in the 20th century. The first industrial revolution was peaking in 1900, and at that point, the internal combustion engine was invented, electricity, oil and gas. For 40 years, the first and second industrial revolution lived side by side. The smart companies were in two models, but hurriedly getting to the second, and by 1945, the companies that survived made the shift. The third industrial revolution comes in nodally like Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi was unbelievably improbable. Somebody figured out how to use cheap frequencies on the spectrum to open their garage openers and then connect it to the next house and the next house. Now entire continents are connected for free. This is the way the TIR comes in. When Nord-Pas-de-Calais establishes its third industrial revolution node, immediately the infrastructure creates jobs, businesses, and income. As President Pecheron said, we knew how to do the first industrial revolution. We lost ground in the second industrial revolution. We're going to make sure that we lead the third industrial revolution. And other regions I've talked to in France are saying the same thing. But when they create that node, immediately you're creating jobs, businesses, and income. This is 30 years of an infrastructure build out. You have to retrofit every building in that region, thousands of buildings. That's a lot of jobs. You have to put the power plants on the buildings, pillar 2. We have to put in storage technology across the region, pillar 3. We have to introduce the energy internet, pillar 4. We have to change the entire transport and logistics of that port region like your port region, pillar 5. 40 years. That's how you have prosperity. My country, our greatest prosperity was between 1956 and 1988. We matured the second industrial revolution. We built out the interstate highway system. It was the biggest platform, the most expensive public investment in history. And then we created the suburbs off the interstates and the shopping malls and the commercial centers and the freight by road. We put it all together and we peaked around 1988. So in that region of France, Nord-Pas-de-Calais, this infrastructure, 30 years, and I won't let this out at this point because we have a 100,000-page report, and the president will do this on October 24th. They're going to spend substantial money, and the money is there. There's so much money. All over the world, banks are investing in treasury notes in the U.S. at zero interest rate because they don't know what to invest in. The third industrial revolution is assured investment because you can actually run the numbers and actually know how much energy you save, calculate the productivity gain, absolutely, and then determine your investment based on that and how you will get your investment back. Not rocket science. Let me end by saying, I think this plan is common sense. It's been embraced by the European Union. China is really having an aggressive discussion on it right now. They're having a discussion. The United Nations has embraced it, UNIDO, United Nations Industrial Development Organization, because it can move quicker in the developing countries because they have no infrastructure. They have actually an asset, which is they have no infrastructure. So you can build it out cheaper and quicker than restoring and renovating an old infrastructure in the industrialized regions. And already in rural Africa and rural India, microgrids are coming in all over. And when the power went out in India, remember last year, 800 million people, no power? Local villages were powered. They were all third industrial revolution. They had the wind, the solar, the fans were on, the churning machines were on, everything worked. But we're not going to get there just with a plan based on technology. What I want to say to you is we're going to have a shift in consciousness. We're going to have to be able to have a new story for the human race to accompany this economic paradigm shift, or we just won't get there in time. The great economic revolutions changed consciousness. The hydraulic revolutions in Sumer, Mesopotamia, Indus Valley of India, and China took us from mythological to theological consciousness. The first industrial revolution took us from theological to ideological consciousness. The second industrial revolution in the 20th century took us from ideological to psychological consciousness. And all these things change along with the way we organize our spatial temporal environments. My sense is we're on the cusp of a new shift in consciousness, from geopolitics to biosphere frame of reference. The biosphere is the sheath from the stratosphere to the oceans, where living processes and chemical processes interact to maintain the stability of this fragile experiment called life. I'm guardedly hopeful because all over France there are middle-class kids coming home, and all over the world in the last 10 years, and they've got biosphere consciousness. They're asking their parents, why are you using that TV in the next room? Nobody's watching it. You're wasting electricity. Why so much water when daddy's shaving? It's wasting the water. Why do we have 2 cars? Why not car share one or do the bikes? Or the one I particularly like, young kids are coming home and say, where did my piece of beef come from here in France? I know you don't want to hear this, and I know that Jacques Attali talked about it, and this is a beef country. The number 1 cause of climate change is buildings, energy use. Number 3 is transport. Number 2 is beef production and consumption and related animal husbandry, and nobody wants to talk about it. Even Al Gore won't talk about it. So the kids are asking, where did this piece of beef come from? Did it come from a rainforest? Did they have to destroy the trees to graze the cow? What happened to all the rare species of life in that tree canopy when they destroyed the trees to graze the cow? And if the trees aren't there, they're no longer acting as a sink to absorb CO2. So that means the temperature is going up on the planet because of my piece of beef here on my table in France. And that means that some farmers experiencing floods and droughts and can't feed their family the piece of beef. What these kids are learning is ecological footprint. We never knew about this 20 years. It's measurable. They're learning that everything we do intimately affects the well-being of everything else in this biosphere. So whatever we do affects the well-being of other humans, other species, and ecosystems we live in. So I think we're on the cusp of ecological shift, and in China, the Vice Premier Wang Yang, the Science Minister Wang Gang, all of them said to me, and this is part of the new thrust in China, we want to build an ecological civilization. This is a brand new conversation in China with the new leadership. And they mean an ecological civilization not for China, but for the world. This is just beginning. And that is, we need to start thinking of ourselves as part of the human race. We don't give up our national loyalties, our religious identity, our family and cultural identity, but we're nestled in this biosphere together. We need to think of ourselves as one human family. We need to think of our fellow creatures as our evolutionary relatives. They're part of this. They have a right to be here with us or without us. And we have to believe that the biosphere is the indivisible community in which we all thrive or perish. That's an ecological civilization. I believe that France is ideally positioned now to join Germany. And I think it's going to happen in the business community, as noted by the companies that joined us in the first master plan in Nord-Pas-de-Calais. Nobody knows more about energy than French companies. We just have to start changing the energies we're using. Nobody's better equipped than France to understand construction, and Bouygues created the first positive power building. Pillar 3, you have engineers that can do storage technologies better than anybody. Pillar 4, nobody's better equipped than France to understand communications. You pioneered so much of the communication revolution. And Pillar 5, you have world-class logistics and transport industries. What we need now is to start thinking about a roadmap for France and for each region that can get us from the second to the third industrial revolution. So I'd end by saying I congratulate President Hollande. He says we're not going to be left out of this third industrial revolution. It's good that the industries now are being provided incentives so that they can move into the new technologies, but They're going to have to plug and play into a third industrial revolution infrastructure, and you've got to build that infrastructure. You're going to lose all of that financing. Do not make the Obama mistake. If you're able to move this, when France joins Germany, we're going to see this formal plan in the EU take off. And we're going to see an infrastructure across Europe where people share energy at low cost, they share transportation and logistics at low marginal cost, and we have a continental market of 1 billion people. 500 million in the Union, 500 million in partnership regions. And when France and Germany join to make this happen, that's going to create the next stage of the European Union experiment, and that is a continental market with network governance in which everybody thrives. So my great hope here with all the business leaders in this room, here in this region and across France, is this is the moment for France to step forward. I can feel it in all the meetings I'm having with French business leaders, small, medium, and large. We're counting on you. Let's make it happen.